Oh.
Everything you say is now recorded.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm looking forward to reading poems to you.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we'll start in a few moments. We'll wait for other participants to enter, and then we start.
Yeah, okay. You see what I mean, Edna?
Once we start, there will be a presentation of the poems in English and in Hebrew, but if you want to read it from your own text, it's fine, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yes, okay. You're going to put the poems up on the screen?
Yeah.
Well, I'll read from that. That would be a good idea.
Well, you might be
But I have my wife's beside me with the book and the post-its in the between the pages, just in case I can't read it on the screen.
Okay.
So
whatever works. Okay.
Yeah. What happens is neither works. I'm singing a song. What?
We won't get it. It will be okay. I think it will be okay. I think we'll be okay. Okay.
So we'll start in a minute or so.
Okay.
Hebrew reading. Pause for Hebrew reading.
You see, even, I don't know what it is, you see. I need all these pillows.
Okay.
Yeah. Are these people all reading as well?
Sarah's watching.
Okay, good evening.
Your daughter is here too.
Hello, how are you? Great to be, as I say, in Israel, enjoying the sunshine by osmosis or something magical. I think it's called Zoom, is it?
Yes, Zoom. Yes, the magic of Zoom, of the internet.
Yeah.
So just in a second, Lior will introduce you, Michael, and I'll say a few opening words, just to say that I'm really happy to host this event with Lyor Shternberg and Michael Longley. This is the last day, third day, and the last day of the Poetry Place International Festival number 4. Welcome. My name is Gilad Meiri, and I am the artist director of Poetry Place with Noah Shakarji, and the artist director of this festival with Noah and Netzer Lau, that is here with us. Say hello, Netzer. And I'm honored to introduce Lyor Shternberg, who will introduce Michael Longley in a moment. Lior is a poet, an editor, a translator of poetry and prose, and teaches writing and translation workshops. He published 6 award-winning poetry collections, and recently a selected poems comprehensive collection was published by the Bialik Institute. He lives in Jerusalem, he's married, and he has 2 girls. Lior is one of the founders of Poetry Place in Jerusalem, and he's a teacher in the Hebrew University, secondary school, and at the School of Literary Arts, which is part of Poetry Place. In his translation works, Lior focuses mainly on New Irish poetry. His translations were published by Keshev Poetry House, poetry collections by Patrick Kavanagh, Evan Boland, Tony Curtis, and a collection of poetry and essays of Seamus Heaney in collaboration with Ariel Zinder. This year, The Waterbirds, a collection of poems by Michael Longley, will be published in Keshev Poetry House, as well as a special issue he is editing right now of Nanopoetics, which is the name of a literary magazine, which is part of Poetry Place, and it will dedicate this volume to Irish poetry. And Lior, please.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Gilad. Thanks for everyone in the poetry place. And I'm very, very happy to be here and to host this meeting with Michael Longley. Speaking for myself, I've known Michael's poetry for many years, and it's a great honor for me to be able to talk with you and to read together poems of you in English and in Hebrew. I will say a few words about Michael Longley. He was born in 1939. He's one of the most prominent Irish writers writing today. He's published above 20 books since the 60s of the previous century. He won many prestigious awards. For example, the Witherwood Prize for Poetry, the T.S. Eliot Prize for Poetry, and the Feltinelli Italian Prize just lately on behalf of the דה-לינצ'י Academy. It was given the Queen's Medal for Poetry in 2001, and he lives in Belfast and in Carrigskeewaun, which are two places. Belfast, of course, is known, but Carrigskeewaun, we'll talk about later, is a special place where Michael lives part of the year and writes about it a lot. So we'll start by reading, I think, poems about this place, and we'll talk about it quite later. Michael, I'll be very happy if we'll start just reading 4 or 5 poems according to the order, and you can say whatever you want. Maybe I'll ask questions, and maybe later we'll open another discussion. Okay?
Okay.
So we'll start with the waterfall, which is the first poem.
Yes, this poem is not set in Ireland at all. It is in fact set in Tuscany, in close to a lovely little village called Cardozo up in the hills, and it refers to chestnut trees, which used to be a central part of the economy there. If you were to read my poems, all of them, I mean, my life's work, at the one sitting in the one place, let it be here by this half-hearted waterfall that allows each pebbly basin its separate say, damp stones and syllables. Then, as it grows dark and you go home past overgrown vineyards and chestnut trees, suppliers once of crossbeams, moon-shaped nuts, flour, and crackly stuffing for mattresses. Leave them here, on the page, in your mind's eye, lit like the fireflies at the waterfall, a wall of stars.
Thank you, Michael. I'll read the Hebrew version.
It's okay.
המפל. אם תקראי את שיריי, כלומר את כולם, מלאכת חיי, בבת אחת, במקום אחד, עשי זאת כאן, סמוך למפל המאסס הזה, המניח לכל אפיק זרוע חלוקים לומר את דברו, אבנים לחות ועיצורים. אז, כשמחשיך ואת עושה את דרכך הביתה, דרך כרמים פרועים ועצי ארמון, שפעם סיפקו קורות, אגוזים דמויי סהר, קמח ומילוי מזרונים בתפצפץ, תשאירי אותם כאן, על הדף, בעיני רוחך, דולקים כמו גחליליות לצד המפל, קיר כוכבים.
Sounds even better in Hebrew.
No, it's not. But thank you very much. Now we read the second poem, which we remember in Carrigskeewaun.
Yes.
And you are very welcome to say something about how this poem became, and a little bit about Carrigskeewaun, which you write about a lot. So
well, Carrigskeewaun is a small townland, a small little area in County Mayo, in the wilds of the west of Ireland. And this poem describes a day when all sorts of magical things happened. About 1/3 of all my poems are written about this little place. And this poem is set in I'm in Belfast, remembering that magic day in Corrigskeewan. A wintry night, the hearth inhales, and the chimney becomes a windpipe, fluffy with soot and thistledown, a voice box recalling animals. The leveret come of age, snipe at an angle, then the porpoise's demonstration of meaningless smiles. Home is a hollow between the waves, a clump of nettles, feathery winds, and memory no longer than a day when the animals come back to me from the townland of Corrigskeewan, from a page lit by the Milky Way.
Thank you, thank you. It's a beautiful poem. לזכור את קורריgskeewan. לילה חורפי, הקמין שואף, והערובה הופכת לקנה נשימה, מרופד בפיח ואבקני קוצים. גרון המשיב את זכרם של בעלי חיים. גור ארנבת שבגר, פרטומן נוטה מעט, ואז הפוקנות בתצוגה של חיוכים חסרי פשר. בית ובקע בין גלים, טווח סרפדים, רוחות נוציות, וזיכרון שאורכו אך יום אחד, בו שבות אליי החיות מקורrigskeewan, מתוך דף זוהר באור שביל החלב. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll read the
green shank.
Green shank.
Yeah. Now, the green shank is a very elegant little wading bird with a long beak and an exquisite call. In this poem, I mention a nearby lake, the Corrigan Lake, and every year I think there can be no more poems about Corrigskeewan and County Mayo, but they keep coming. And last year, for instance, there were more than ever. So this is a poem about that and this wonderful place and this beautiful little bird. When I've left Corrigskeewan for the last time, I hope you discover something I've overlooked. Green shanks, say, 2 or 3, elegantly probing where sand from the white strand and the burial mound blows in. How long will Corrigan remain a lake? If I had to choose a bird, if I had to choose a bird call for reminding you, the green shank's estuarial fluting would do.
Thank you. I read the Hebrew. ביצנית. כשאעזוב את קורrigskeewan בפעם האחרונה, אני מקווה שתגלו משהו שהחמצתי. ביצניות למשל, 2 או 3 מהן, מחטטות באלגנטיות במקום בו נאסף חול מן החוף הלבן או מתל הקבורה. כמה זמן יישאר קורגון אגם? לו היה עליי לבחור קריאת ציפור שתזכיר לכם, שריקת הביצנית מן השפך תספיק בהחלט.
Thank you.
We'll read another poem which is connected, which is about Corrigskeewan, and then maybe I will ask you something about writing about nature in Corrigskeewan. So we'll read now the Wren, okay?
Yes, the Wren. This mentions Muil Ray, which is the mountain behind the cottage. It's one of my holy mountains, if you like. And the last line of this poem is a definition of what poetry is. I'm writing too much about it. Oh, by the way, it's addressed to 2 of my grandsons. I'm writing too much about Corrigskeewan, I think, until you 2 come along, my grandsons, and we generalize at once about cows and sheep. A day here represents a lifetime. Bird's foot trefoil among wild thyme. Dawn and dusk muddled on the ground. The crescent moon fading above Wheelwray's shoulder, as hares sip brackish water at the stepping stones, and the innovative raven flips upside down as though for you. I burble under your siesta like a contrapuntal runnel, and the heather stand that shelters the lesser tway blade shelters you. We sleepwalk around a townland whooper swans from the tundra, remember, and the Saharan wheat ear. I want you both to remember me and what the wind-tousled wren has been saying all day long from fence posts and the fuchsia depths, a brain-rattling bramble song inside a knothole.
Thank you. הגדרון. נדמה לי שאני כותב יותר מדי על קריס קירון, עד שאתם מגיעים נכדיי, ואנחנו גולשים מיד להכללות בעניין פרות וכבשים. יום כאן הוא כמו חיים שלמים, לוטוס מצוי בין שיחי קורנית הבר, שחר וערביים ברבוביה על פני האדמה, צער הירח דוהה מעל כתף מיולרע, כשארנבות לוגמות מים מליחים בין אבני תעלה, והעורב, רב ההמצאה, מתהפך באוויר כאילו למענכם. אני מבעבע תחת הסיאסטה שלכם, כמו פלג דו-קולי, בשיח אברש, השוחח על הסחלב הזעיר, שוחח גם עליכם. אנחנו הולכים בשנתנו במרחבי חלקת ארץ העולה בזיכרונם של ברבורים מן הטונדרה ושל סלעית המדבר. אני רוצה ששניכם תזכרו אותי, ואת מה שהגדרון סתור הרוח אמר כל היום מעל עמודי הגדר, ואת עומקי הפוקסיה, קרקו שיר הפטל בתוך חור של עץ.
A brain-rattling bramble song inside a knothole.
Yeah.
That's poetry.
Yes. Something which is both natural and seemingly insignificant, but very significant, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. The next poem, Heron,
yes,
is have you put it up on the screen? It's not up on the screen yet. I'll wait for it to go up on the screen and then I'll read it.
Maybe we'll read it in a minute. I just wanted to ask you something about nature poems in general, okay?
Yes.
So you said that 1/3 of your poems now are about text, about nature, and I find it fascinating because for me it's a privilege to live in a place which ignites you in this way. So if you can maybe say something more about writing nature poems, what does it mean to you writing nature poems in such an amount?
Well, I think being attentive, paying attention and being curious about the other creatures that we share the globe with, and the plants on which life on Earth depends, just looking at them closely. And I don't set out to write poems. I never set out to write poems. Poems have to come to me. Mm-hmm. And I find that if I look long enough at a snowdrop, say, or listen attentively enough to a wild bird's song, to a robin's song, the poem, the muse visits me with lines which I have not exactly composed. Mm. They have come into my head thanks to a beautiful flower or an exquisite bird song. And I find that when I hear, say, the robin's spring song, or the black-capped beautiful little bird that's comes to our garden, which is sometimes compared to the nightingale in the beauty of its song. I find an electric charge goes through me. And I love all the little birds, all the little flowers, which most people call weeds. They're the ones I like. I mean, the only thing that's worth looking at on a lawn are the buttercups and daisies, the so-called weeds. And for me, looking with not exactly reverence, just with concentration and with my every pore in my body, every brain cell open to possibilities, is a religious experience.
Thank you. It's fascinating, and what's more, I find it very. I'm jealous about it in both ways. But first, that you can live in such a beautiful place, and second, that you know all the details. You know the bird's name, and you know the flowers' names, and the weeds' names, and it's great. It says something about your concentration, about knowing the. You don't just say, okay, this is a nice bird. You know the specific bird's type.
Oh yes, yes. I have had great friendships. I was friendly. He died a while back with a world expert in orchids, the wild orchids of Ireland, called Raymond Piper. And I used to go out with him looking for wild orchids. Now that was an education. And then I don't actually own the cottage in Corrigsky-1. It's owned by a very great ornithologist whose brains I also pick very greedily, called David Cabot. Again, to be out in the field, as it were, with David is an education where you go shh, 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 and he'll name the bird, you know, a little snow. He'll say shh, 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 snow bunting. And I mean, to be out in the field with Cabot and Piper was like going to university for about 4 years, just in 2 or 3 afternoons. And the English language, I don't know what Hebrew is like, but the English language is blessed with beautiful names for the flowers and the birds. I mean, just the word snowdrop, for instance, you know, or spring gentian.
I have to say that as a translator, sometimes this beautiful thing gives me a lot of trouble, because what is so beautiful and easy in English and specific in English, I have to find the exact Hebrew word, and sometimes there's not a specific bird or a flower like this. So I have to find something similar so it will work in Hebrew. So it's very interesting and very challenging sometimes.
Yes, that's right.
But I appreciate it very much.
I'm sorry about that. For the next poems, I'll be looking at even more obscure flowers to challenge you.
Okay. Yeah. Let's read Heron, which is very interesting because it's both a poem about Corrigsky-1, but it is a poem about a poet friend of yours, Kenneth Koch, which is another thing that you do. You write about your friends, about other poets, some of them when they are alive, after they are dead. So let's read it, and maybe you would like to say something about it too.
Yeah, well, I think elegy is one of the main things that poetry does. Mm-hmm. And poetry gives everything a second chance.
Yeah.
And it also gives human beings a second chance when they're dead and when they've gone away. Kenneth Koch is one of the very famous New York poets. He wrote poetry of a completely different kind from the kind of poetry that I write. But we got on tremendously well, and he was hilariously funny. And in this poem, I imagine showing him around Corrigsky-1, introducing him to County Mayo and the west of Ireland, And there are one or two learned, because he was a bit of a pedant, there are one or two references, technical references in the poem, Latin names for the heron, and for the person who would, in ancient Rome, curl people's hairs with a hot tongs. And also, well, I better read the poem. I hope anyone listening will surf ride the more technical moments. But this is full of love for this brilliant, hilarious New York Jew. You died the day I was driving to Corrigsky 1, a remote townland in County Mayo, I explain, meaning, so far as I know, the rock of the wall fern. And although it was the wettest Irish year, I got the car across the river and through the tide with groceries and laundry for my fortnight among the waterbirds. If I'd known you were dying, Kenneth, I'd have packed into cardboard boxes all your plays and poems as well, and added to Curlew and Lapwing anxiety calls, the lyric intensity of your New York Jewish laughter. You would have loved the sandy drive over the Dirk. The what? Over the Machair. The what? The drive through the white gateposts and the galvanized gate tied with red string, the starlings' sleeping quarters. The drive towards turf-fired hilarity and disbelief. Where are all those otters? Where are all those otters, Longley, and all those hares? I see only sparrows here, and house sparrows at that. You are so tall and skinny, I shall conscript a heron to watch over you on hang glider wings, old soldier. An ashy heron, Ardea cinerea, I remind you, a pedant, neither small-minded nor half-hearted. And Cinerarius, a slave who heats the iron tongs in hot ashes for the hairdresser, a hair curler who will look after every hair on your curly head. That afternoon was your night season. I didn't know. I didn't know that you were poured out like water and all your bones were out of joint. I didn't know. Tuck your head in like a heron and trail behind you your long legs. Take to the air above a townland that encloses Corrigsky 1 and Central Park.
Thank you. ענפה. מתת ביום שבו נהגתי לקרקסקי 1. חבל ארץ נידח במחוז מאיו, אני מסביר. משמעות השם למיטב ידיעתי, סלע שרח החומה. ולמרות שהייתה זו השנה הגשומה ביותר באירלנד, הצלחתי לחצות במכונית את הנהר והגאות, עם קניות וכניסה לשבועיים בין ציפורי המים. אם הייתי יודע שאתה גוסס, קנט, הייתי אורז בקופסאות קרטון גם את כל המחזות והשירים שכתבת, ומוסיף להם את קריאות המצוקה של החרטומן והקיבית, את חיסותו הלירית של צחוקך היהודי, הניו יורקי. הייתי אוהב את הנסיעה על פני הדורק, ומה? על פני המחר, ומה? את הנסיעה בין עמודי השער הלבנים ושער הברזל המגולבן, האחוז בסרט אדום, את מתחמי השינה של הזרזירים, את הנסיעה לקראת צחוק ופקפוק דלוקי כבול. היכן כל הלוטרות, לונגלי, כל הארנבות? אני רואה כאן רק דרורים ועוד דרורי בית בסך הכל. אתה כל כך רזה וצנום שאגייס ענפה לשמור עליך בכנפיים מוטות חייל ותיק. ענפה בגון אפר, ארדיה כנריה, להזכירך, פדנט רחב אופקים ונלהב. וכנרריוס, עגב ועבד שתפקידו לחמם את מלקחי הברזל בגחלים לוהטות עבור הספר, מסלסל שיער שישגיח על כל שערה בראשך המטולטל. אותו אחר צהריים היה זמן הלילה שלך. לא ידעתי שנשפחת כמו ים וכל עצמותיך פרוקות. לא ידעתי. פוף את ראשך על החזה כמו ענפה, ושרך אחריך את רגליך הארוכות. רוס כנף מעל חבל ארץ, המקיף את קריקסקיוואן ואת הסנטרל פארק. Okay.
Thank you. That's quite a hard poem to read, I found, you know.
Okay, but we did it.
We did it. We got there. And we brought Kenneth Coke with us. And I would recommend to people in Israel his poetry.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Right now, there was a book, just right now, a book published of his poetry, translations by Wojcicki Arad, poems by Kenneth Coke.
Oh, thank you. That is very, very, very good news. Thank you.
Great. I didn't know that. Okay. We'll move on to, I think, two poems which belong to the poems that you write, let's say, through the poetry of Homer. You use sometimes the Odyssey or the Iliad in order to write some things which is private for you. So if you could say something about it before we read them, and then we'll talk about them separately.
Well, I read classics at Trinity College, Latin and Greek, but I spent most of my time trying to write poems. I wrote dreadful poems for about 3 or 4 years. And it wasn't really until I was in my 40s that I rediscovered Greek, especially, and Latin to some extent. And I was drawn to the Iliad and the Odyssey. And these are astonishing works of art, which were created before alphabets. So they were recited by heart from memory by the bards. And the Iliad in particular might be, I think, our greatest poem about war and death. And the Odyssey is like the first picaresque novel. In fact, it's a number of novels. And I found that there were I'm not interested in producing translations. I'm interested in writing lyric poems, which are refractions of the Greek. And in a way, some of my refractions have allowed me to write belated lamentations for my parents and lamentations for the troubles of Northern Ireland. In fact, I think inside a really great masterpiece like the Iliad, there are all of these smaller possible works of art waiting to be discovered. And I think of my Homer poems, like the paintings that the great European tradition has produced of scenes from the Iliad and the Odyssey. And at the moment, I have an idea to write a poem about an episode derived from an episode in the Iliad, to write a poem for Ukraine. But I'm so frightened of making a mess of it. I don't want to get started on it, you know. I keep postponing it. And I shouldn't really be talking about it now because that's bad luck to do that.
Okay.
But I think no one should go to university, no matter what their subject, without having read in translation, the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Old Testament.
Thank you very much. It's been great to hear it. And let's read the O and then Anticlea.
Yeah. Yes, the Or's about the end of a journey, and it's really Odysseus imagining his end, and he's far away from the sea among people who know nothing about the sea and who think that he's carrying an oar, and they think that the oar is a winnowing fan. So it's a poem about the end of a journey and possibly death. I am meant to wander with a well-balanced oar until I meet people who know nothing about the sea, salty food, prows painted purple, oars that are ships' wings. And somebody mistakes the oar on my shoulder for a winnowing fan, the signal to plant it in the ground and start saying my prayers, to go on saying my prayers once I'm home, weary but well looked after in old age by my family and friends and other happy islanders. And death will come to me, a gentle sea breeze, no more than an exhalation, the waft from a winnowing fan or oar.
Thank you very much. I'll read the Hebrew. עליי לנדוד אל פנים הארץ ומשות מאוזן על כתפיי, עד שאפגוש אנשים שאינם יודעים דבר על הים. אוכל שהומלח, חרטומי ספינות צבועים סגול, משוטים שהם כנפי הספינות. ומישהו יתאה לחשוב כי המשות שעל כתפיי הוא מזרה. האות לשתול אותו באדמה, ולהתחיל לומר את תפילותיי, ולומר אותם גם בשובי הביתה. מותש, אך מטופל היטב לעת זקנה, בידי משפחתי וידידיי ושאר תושבים שמחים של האי. ומוות יבוא אליי, רוח ים קלה, לא יותר מנשיפה, משב מזרה או משות. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anticlea, which is about Odysseus meeting his mother in Hades.
In Hades, in the underworld.
Yeah.
And it's also a poem about my own mother.
Yeah.
It's a bit complicated at the beginning, and it unravels. It is all in one sentence.
Yes.
Which means I have to take a deep breath now. If at a rock where resonant rivers meet, Acheron, Paraphlegathon, Cocytus, tributary of the Styx, you dig a pit about a cubit each way from knuckles to elbow, and sacrifice a ram and a black ewe, bending their heads towards the outer darkness, while you face the water. And so many souls of the anemic dead come crowding in, that you hold them back with your bayonet from the blood, only to recognize among the zombies your own mother. And if, having given her blood to drink and talked about home, you lunge forward 3 times to hug her, and 3 times, like a shadow or idea, she vanishes through your arms, and you ask her why she keeps avoiding your touch, and weep, because here is your mother, and even here in Hades, you could comfort each other in a shuddering embrace. Will she explain that the sinews no longer bind her flesh and bones, that the irresistible fire has demolished these, that the soul takes flight like a dream and flutters in the sky, that this is what happens to human beings when they die.
Thank you. It's a great poem, very touching. I read the Hebrew. and declare. אם לצד צלע של מרגלותיו נפגשים הנהרות המהדהדים, החרון, פירפלגטון, קוקיטוס, הסטיקס, תחפור בור, אמה על אמה, אצבע עד מרפק, ותקריב אייל, וכבשה שחורה, מסבת ראשיהם אל עבר החשיכה הסובבת, בעוד פניך פונים למים, ונשמות כה רבות של מתים אנמיים מצטופפות סביבך, עד כי עליך להרחיקם בכידונך מן הדם, רק כדי לזהות בין הזומבים את אמך אורתך. ואם לאחר שנתת לה לשתות מן הדם, ודיברת איתה על הבית, תסתער קדימה 3 פעמים לחבקה ו3 פעמים כצל או רעיון, היא תעלה מבין זרועותיך. ותשאל אותה, מדוע היא מתמידה לחמוק ממגעך ותבכה, כי הנה כאן עמך ואפילו כאן, בהדס, הייתם יכולים לנחם זה את זה בחיבוק רועד. האם היא תסביר כי הגידים כבר לא קושרים את בשרה ועצמותיה? כי האש שאין לעוצרה כבר החריבה אותם? כי הנפש כחלום תעוף תרפרף בשחקים? כי זה מה שקורה לבני אנוש במותם.
Thank you. Thank you. And you want to go do the next one's a corollary to that, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about shall I talk about the balloon?
Yes, yes.
You want to put it up on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
up. And here it is.
Here we are. Yeah. My mother was born with a congenital hip malformation, and she walked with a very, very severe limp. And I had this strange dream where I was floating above her, and she was running through fields without a limp. And she was called Constance. And this was the sort of dream you don't want to waken up from, because she was cured of her limp in the dream. The balloon. You are a child in my dream, and not my mother. I float above your head as in a hot air balloon that casts no shadow on you, looking up at me and smiling and waving and running without a limp across the shallow streams and fields of shiny grass, as though there were neither malformation nor pain. This is the first time ever I have seen you running. You are a child in the dream and not my mother, which may be why I call from the balloon to you. Jump over the hedges, Connie. Jump over the trees.
Thank you. כדור פורח. בחלום את ילדה ולא אמי. אני מרחף מעל לראשך כמו בכדור פורח שאינו מטיל צל עלייך, המביטה מעלה אליי. ומחייכת ומנופפת, ורצה מבלי לצלוע על פני פלגים רדודים ושדות עשב נוצצים, כמו לא היו פגם או כאב בעולם. זו הפעם הראשונה שאני רואה אותך רצה. בחלום את ילדה ולא אמי. וזאת אולי הסיבה שאני קורא אלייך מן הכדור הפורח. קבצי מעל הגדרות השיחים, קוני. קבצי מעל העצים.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next poem is a poem about your father, which you write about him also a lot. He's a very important figure in your life and in your poetry. There are poems which are not here that deal with his past in the war and his injuries. And what's interesting about this poem, and this is why I chose it, is that it combines the memory of your father with a very a terrible event that happened during the travels.
Yes.
That you mentioned in the third stanza. So maybe you can say something about the connection that you made here, and then of course we'll read the poem.
Well, my father was served in both world wars. He joined up in 1914 at the age of 17. He was a captain by the time he was 20. He'd won the Military Cross, and increasingly he's a hero figure for me. Although he died when I was about 19, and I thought I knew everything and he knew nothing. And I regret very much that I didn't talk to him more. And during the Troubles, I sometimes wondered, what would my father have made of this? And in this particular episode, 10 linen workers, it's called the King's Mills Massacre. 10 linen workers were shot on their way home from work by the IRA, simply because they were Protestant. And I turned to the ghost of my father. I mean, I was completely flabbergasted. That's the sort of thing that happens in both our countries. And it's very, very difficult to find ways of dealing with it, absorbing the awfulness and the evil of it. So at such junctions, at such confusing junctions, I would often turn to the ghost of my old soldier father. And here's the poem. Christ's teeth ascended with him into heaven. Through a cavity in one of his molars, the wind whistles. He is fastened forever by his exposed canines to a wintry sky. I am blinded by the blaze of that smile and by the memory of my father's false teeth brimming in their tumbler. They wore bubbles, and outside of his body, a deadly grin. When they massacred the 10 linen workers, there fell on the road beside them spectacles, wallets, small change, and a set of dentures. Blood, food particles, the bread, the wine. Before I can bury my father once again, I must polish the spectacles, balance them upon his nose, fill his pockets with money, and into his dead mouth slip the set of teeth.
עובדי מפעל הטקסטיל. שיניו של ישו עלו עמו השמיימה, דרך חור שבאחת התוכנות הרוח שורקת, ומהודק לנצח בניביו החשופים לשמיים חורפיים. אני מסונבר מבורק החיוך הזה, ומזיכרון שיניו של אבי הזורחות בתוך הכוס. הן העלו בועות, ומחוץ לגופו גיחוך נורא. כשטבחו בעשרת הפועלים, נפלו לצידם על הכביש משקפיים, ארנקים, מטבעות, שיניים תותבות, דם, שאריות אוכל, הלחם, היין. בטרם אוכל לקבור את אבי, עליי להבריק שוב את המשקפיים, להרכיב אותם על אפו, למלא את כיסיו בכסף, ולהחליק את שיניו התותבות אל תוך פיו המת. Okay, this is a difficult poem to read, to absorb. But I think it's also, I put it here because you wanted to end the session, and before we go on to the question from the audience, with your poem Ceasefire, which connects very strongly to this, because it was written about the troubles, about the terrible things that happened in Ireland. And it is a very interesting story because you published it just a few days before the peace agreement.
Yes, it was August 94. There were rumors that there might be a ceasefire, an IRA ceasefire. And I happened to be reading at that time the episode in the Iliad where the old king Priam plucks up courage and goes to visit Achilles, the great Greek general, in his tent to beg for the body of his son Hector, whom Achilles has killed in combat. And Achilles is dragging the body of Hector after his chariot in order to, I won't go into the details of why he's doing it, but the old king goes, and Achilles is softened. Priam reminds Achilles of his own father and reawakens in Achilles all the more tender feminine aspects of his body, he awakens in Achilles the tenderer side of his makeup, which he's had to suppress in order to be a great general. And this is probably my best known poem, and it acquired some reputation. It was published in the Irish Times the same week that the IRA did declare their ceasefire. And I read it now because sometime later, as a result of the ceasefire, we got the Belfast Agreement, the settlement, and which I would love Israel to work out for itself as well. And the 25th anniversary of that is coming up very soon. Ceasefire. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed and, for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present, home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed. I get down on my knees and do what must be done and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son.
Thank you. I read the Hebrew, which is not mine. The translation is by ברק פז. בזכרו את אביו ונרגש הדמעות, אסף אכילס את יד המלך הזקן ודחף אותו הצידה ברכות. אך פריאם נאחז בעקביו והשניים בכו עד שעצב מילא את המרחב. באוספו את גופת הקטור לידיו אכילס וידא שנוקטה, ולמען המלך הזקן הונחה במדי לוחם, מוכנה להילקח בידי פריאם עטופה כמתנה לטרויה עם זריחה. כשסעדו ביחד, שבעו השניים נחת בהביטם זה ביופיו של זה, כאוהבים, אכילס הבנוי כאל, פריאם עודו נאה ודברן, שקודם פלט הנחה לאוויר. על ברכי אני קורע עושה את המוטל, נושק את יד אכילס, הוא שאת בני קטל. Okay, maybe we will have time later to read a poem that you would like, which is not part of the presentation, but first let's see if there are questions from the audience. Gilad, I don't know.
There's one question about the the Irish poetry today, the young Irish poetry today, what you can tell us about it?
Well, my generation who came into prominence in the 60s, you know, Matt, Derek Mann, Seamus Heaney, we were about to rest on our laurels, I think, and along came Muldoon, Paul Muldoon, Kieran Carson, Maeve McGuckian, and I think they were about to sit on their laurels, and along came Leontia Flynn, Sinead Morrissey, Alan Gillis, and there's another group. So I can't think of a more poetry-friendly place on earth than Northern Ireland. It's kind of for some time it's been kind of resented in Great Britain, in England, and dare I say it, south of the border in Dublin. Now, why this should be so, I think it's got something to do with the coincidence of talent. You know, like the French Impressionists, where you had about easily 10 painters who were all terrific. And all of those poets I mentioned are the true thing, the real thing. And on American radio, in an interview, I was trying to be funny. I was asked the same question as you. And I said, I think it's got something to do. Why are there so many poets coming from the north of Ireland? And I said, I think it's got something to do with the water supply. It comes from a place called the Silent Valley. But nobody laughed, and I can see around here nobody's actually laughing at it. But anyway, it's very, very exciting, and it is. I'm now 83, and I'm kept on my toes trying to keep up with the youngsters.
Okay, it's very interesting. It's both the way that many great poets came from approximately the same place, and that you say it's a very friendly place. So it's a very friendly thing that there are generation following generation without fighting each other. Because sometimes in poetry, you know, the new generation has to abuse or kill metaphorically the old generation in order to grow. And for what you say and from what I know, it's not like this in Ireland, Northern Ireland, or both in South Ireland. Am I right? There's a great honor and deep recognition of each other.
Yes, I don't think any poem is a solo flight. I don't think so. I think they're all the poets from the past, and with regard to the poets from the various generations who are friends of mine, there's a two-way pulling. There's a two-way tension between mutual support and competition, and I think that's it. Poems converse with each other, and poets converse with each other, and poetry is in the air, and there's a kind of convection current when it's part of a society, as it is here. There's a convection current that lifts everyone up. Everyone's lifted in this convection current. And then the Irish poetry seems to recognize that poetry's roots are in song and in story.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, all the fads which are born of the computer are distractions. If poetry loses track of its roots in song and story. It's finished.
Yes, yes.
And also, it's very important to have a laity, a general public who recognize these facts. And if any art form loses its general public, its laity, it's lost.
Yeah.
Because poetry is not altogether a solo act, as I've said. There's the other poets, but there's also the society which generated the poetry. And I think that's why in Northern Ireland, poetry is so healthy.
And do you feel that this is still like this today, that in Ireland, poetry is important, that people look for poetry, read poetry?
I think so. Yes, yes, yes. I think poetry is more an everyday matter in Ireland. More that it is in a way a country which defines itself and works out its problems sometimes in poetry. And we have a president who writes poetry, and he knows all of us. He sends us Patrick Day cards. So it's very important for artists to be recognized in that unobtrusive, very natural way, you know. And when I go shopping, some percentage of the people I bump into know that I write poetry, and they take that for granted, you know. Yeah. And they'll say nice things like, "I like that poem I heard you read on the radio," or I even better, they'll come up and say, "I have a copy of your book on me. Would you sign it for me?" You know. So it's not what I would call celebrity, which I think is probably very bad for poetry. I mean, I think every poet should be given the title, the name anonymous, and just let the poem stand on its own. But anyway, I'm burbling.
No, but it's fascinating, and I think you are privileged because what you say now about Ireland, I feel it all the time when I publish and when I translate and publish Irish writers here. But it's great hearing it from you, the way you said it. So I'm very happy to hear it. We have to finish in a few minutes. So Gilad, shall we read another poem, or just we'll say goodbye and thank you?
Sure, read another poem.
Sorry?
Yeah, let's end this beautiful event with a reading, because it's very hard to say goodbye.
Okay. So, Michael, if you have a poem that you would like to read, even if it's not on the screen, just read it. So,
can I shall I take a big risk and try and do one by heart without a script?
Yeah.
And this is a poem called Persephone. You should get it out just in case I miss it, you know. In case, Persephone, who ate the seed of the forbidden pomegranate, and her punishment was to spend 6 months in the underworld, as well as come back among us. So it's a kind of mythological explanation of summer and winter, and it's a kind of Greek version of the Adam and Eve story. And I wrote it when I was about 25, and it's a poem of mine that I like, you know. She's speaking from under the ground. I see as through a skylight in my brain, the mole strew its buildings in the rain. The swallows turn above their broken home, and all my acres in delirium. Straight-jacketed by cold and numbskulled, now sleep the well-adjusted and the skilled. The bat folds its wing like a winter leaf. The squirrel in its hollow holds aloof. The weasel and ferret, the stoat and fox, move hand in glove across the equinox. I can tell how softly their footsteps go. Their footsteps borrow silence from the snow.
Beautiful.
Got through it?
Yeah, great.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Michael. I just say 2 sentences in Hebrew, thank you, and then we'll say, I'll return to the English, okay?
Yeah.
So, אז שנייה רגע בעברית, אני רוצה, כדי שזה מהר וזורם, אני רוצה להגיד תודה רבה קודם כל כל מי שהיו פה וליוו אותנו וצפו, ותודה לכל הצוות של מקום לשירה שהפיק והפעיל את הדבר המדהים הזה, לגלעד, לנועה, לנצר, מי ששכחתי עוד ונמצאים כאן, אז סליחה. ואני רוצה להודות גם לרפי וייכרד שבזכותו אני מצליח להוציא ספרים שמשוררים אירים בעברית, והספר של מייקל לונגלי בין ציפורי המים יראה בקשב ממש ממש בקרוב.
ואפילו הכוכב הסמוי של כל הפסטיבל הזה, אחר כך
ממש.
בסוף.
אז תודה רבה גם לו. And thank you, Michael. It's been a privilege and an honor and a pleasure to have you with us this evening.
And thank you for, I'm honored to be invited. And I wish peace in your land, and I recommend the example of Priam and Achilles.
We'll take it.
Thank you for these blessings and prayers and this magical event. And that's a lot of power, you know, to the people, poetry. And what you gave us this evening is a lot of energy and a lot of hope and a lot of love. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm moved by what you say. And I love poetry.
we love it too. That's why we're here.
So in about half an hour, we'll be here with Eva Lipska and Rafi Weichert and some more Polish poetry.
Oh, I'll see if I can get that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, it was wonderful.
אפשר לפתוח את הזה אם אנשים רוצים להגיד משהו, נצר.
פתוח להם, פתוח. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Goodbye, goodbye, my friends. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Well done, Dad.
ליאור כתב,
היה ממש
כל הכבוד.
תודה רבה, היה כיף. תודה.
תודה, רפי.
תגיד, גלעד, להישאר בדבר הזה, או שצריך לצאת ולהיכנס?
זה לינק חדש.
הבנתי. נתראה, ביי.
נתראה, רפי.
And by the way, in the chat, there are so many thank yous and woos, and all in Hebrew, yeah, most of them. Maybe you can some of them.
Tom says that any word that you say, it's a poetry. You don't need to write it. You just need to talk.
Great, thank you. Thank you, I believe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.